homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. Today I am making a pot roast, and this is one of those quintessential easy winter, fall, spring meals that's just so nourishing and delicious and comfort food at its finest, and it's really not complicated. And so I've been making this recipe. I originally clipped this out of a newspaper in my early 20s, and I'm now 57. So I've been making this recipe for a very long time. I modify it just slightly in that I add fewer potatoes and more carrots than what the recipe originally called for. But other than that, simple and absolutely delicious. We're gonna start out with a beef pot roast. We bought a quarter of a cow last year in the fall, and this is one of the roasts from that. Typically, when you're making pot roast, the best cut of meat for this is probably the chuck roast, which is the front shoulder of the cow. But you can use whatever piece of meat you happen to have. Lots of things will work. And I'm not sure what piece this actually came from. They marked it as pot roast, and so that's what I'm going to use it for. And then other than that, we're going to put in some carrots, some homegrown onions, quite a bit, some potatoes, and then I'm going to add a can of canned onion soup. This is from one of the Ball cookbooks, and I made this last year, and it is a really lovely onion soup. If you put, a piece of toasted bread and cheese over it, it makes a delicious onion soup, but it's also a great recipe starter in all kinds of things, and I still have a couple of jars of this on the shelf. And so I'm going to go ahead and use this in place of some of the onions in this recipe. It does have a little bit of red wine. You can choose to leave that out if you want and just substitute a little bit more beef broth. But really simple and just fall apart delicious, and definitely a perfect fall and winter meal. Let's get started.
So one of the keys to any kind of a stewed roast like this is 1, enough salt, and 2, getting a really nice sear on the meat before you add the liquid. And so that's what we're gonna do here. And I've decided I really hate this pepper mill, so I'm looking for a new one. If you have suggestions, I am open to ideas. It's just awkward as all get out to actually work with. I salted and peppered one side, put that in the pot to start searing, and now I'm putting the salt and pepper on the other side. That way I didn't have to flip it over and have everything get wet and half of it end up on the plate. And then while that is searing, and I usually set a timer when I'm searing things because I get busy with other things and sometimes miss it, I'll sear for 4 or 5 minutes per side. So I've got a timer going, and then I'm just chopping up what would normally be, I think the recipe calls for 3 onions chopped, and I'm doing probably about 1.5 onions because the onion soup that I'm putting in this has got a bunch of onions that are cooked down. And then, of course, I need some beautiful garden carrots. Time to flip this bad boy over. Oh, and look, we've got some nice color there. And I'm not going to peel these carrots, so I'm giving them a really good scrub just to get any dirt off. And then I chunk them into basically the kind of bite I would want on the end of a fork, so probably a 1-inch piece here. Totally up to you. I either like my carrots roasted or I love them stewed for a long time in a braising liquid. I don't like them just boiled in a pot. But so adding in our onions, a little bit more salt to help the onions release moisture and deglaze that pan a little bit. And again, while the onions are cooking, we're going to work on our garlic. And this is going to braise for a good long time, and so there's no need to crush this garlic into really tiny pieces. I'm just going to roughly chop it up. And the recipe, as always, for this is in the description. Giving everything a stir, checking on it, making sure nothing's burning. Making sure that pot is starting to deglaze a little bit because that's where all the flavor is. This is our onion soup, getting that ready to go in. And then I'm also starting to chunk up our potatoes, and same routine here. You can leave these pretty chunky if you want. I'm kind of doing probably 1-inch pieces, give or take, just whatever I want to find on the end of a fork. And most of these are a variety called Smilin' Eyes, which is similar to Yukon Gold. In go the garlic, in goes the carrots. And I don't put the garlic in right at the beginning because it possibly is going to burn, and I don't want it to burn. So I'm just adding it towards the end there until it just is fragrant. Adding in our lovely onion soup, a little bit of red wine, giving everything a nice stir. And then the idea here is this piece of meat is going to kind of sit on those vegetables. So it's going to be partially submerged in liquid, but not completely submerged. And that's basically the definition of a braise. A little bit of brown sugar. And then the seasonings on this, other than salt, pepper, is really simple. This is just a nice big handful of homegrown dried parsley. And you could play around with this. A little bit of thyme and rosemary would probably not be bad, but we're going to keep this really simple. We want it to be nice and beefy and not having a lot of other things competing. Putting in all of the potatoes. And then this is a home canned 32-ounce can of tomatoes, whole tomatoes, and I'm just kind of chunking them up with my hands here. If you were using store-bought tomatoes, just a 28-ounce can would be perfectly fine. A little bit more salt. A little bit more awkward black pepper. And then bring that up to where everything is boiling, and that goes into a 375 for a total of 3.5 hours. The last half an hour to 45 minutes uncovered. And what we're looking for here is kind of fall apart, tender meat. And it takes a while for meat to reach the temperature where the collagen in it starts to break down. And so you just can't get this effect fast. I did take the lid off and cooked it for another half an hour in order to evaporate a little bit of the liquid out of this. And that meat released quite a bit of liquid over time as well. A little tricky to get this out of the pot. It kind of came apart in pieces. And I'm just going to let that cool enough to where I can handle it, and then break it up into pieces. Traditionally, a pot roast, you would take it out and slice it and then serve it that way, but I like this more like a stew where things are just shredded and put back in the pot. You can do this however you like. Got some extra goodies for the puppies. This has been sitting for a while. I was letting the meat cool off, and so I'm going to bring this back up to a slow simmer before we serve it. And also taste for seasonings, make sure everything is where we want it. And then I'm just picking this meat apart, and I'm pulling off any large pieces of fat that might be in there that I just don't want on a fork. I'm not being precious about it, but getting the big chunks out. And this meat is just fall apart tender and just so delicious. This is comfort food at its finest. So not completely shredded. I want some nice bites in there, but you can see how easily this just pulls apart. And then that goes back into our pot to reheat. And we're ready to serve. And this didn't need anything. I did give everything a taste, and it was just right. You might need a little bit more salt depending on how big your roast is and whether or not your tomatoes had quite a bit of salt in them or not. These braised carrots in that tomato sauce and wine, oh, just so yummy. It's one of my favorite ways to eat carrots. And we are ready to serve. And then just to pretty it up a little bit, I'm going to put just a sprinkle of some more dried parsley on here. If I had fresh, I would use that, but I didn't, and this is fine. But there you have it, tribe. This is a really great tried and true recipe. I highly recommend it. Give it a try. Thanks for watching, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.